All praise, glory, and honor is certainly due to the Most High, the God of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and peace to you. In the name of Jesus, this is your brother Elisha Israel of the household of faith. And I count it truly a blessing each and every single time that I can come before to preach the word of God. Never do I count it as a light thing to do so. All right, brothers and sisters, my apologies for coming on a little late this evening. I'm not going to keep you long at all. I just want to deal with one article, a news article that I read the other day. And the title is, "Listen, you still Catholic? Are you, after all this, you still Catholic?" You know, I've never, because whatever you want to talk about the black church, and it's true, it's what they so-called black church of Christendom. It is full of hypocrisy. It's leading our people down the wrong path. But when it comes to just spreading untruths and when it comes to just scandal, the Catholic Church is the most infamous religious institution that there is. And I just want to read this. I came across this. I think this came out yesterday. Actually, yesterday. And this one is from CBS News. It said, Vatican confirms secret Catholic Church guidelines for priests who father children. CBS News has confirmed that the Vatican has secret guidelines for priests who father children despite their vows of celibacy. Vincent Dowd, the founder of a support group for children of priests, told CBS News that a Vatican official showed him the confidential instructions. Dowd said he's been pushing the church to publicly support those children who often grow up living in shame and secrecy. CBS News. Peace to everybody who's listening. CBS News correspondent Roxana Saberi spoke with him and other children of priests fighting for recognition from the church, from the Catholic Church. And it says, yeah, you did right to leave. Then it says Sarah Thomas is one of those children. She told CBS News that she's proof priests sometimes break their vows to the church, which for nearly 9 centuries has forbidden its clergymen from sex and marriage. And they didn't always do that. But, you know, I'm going to keep reading this, then we'll go a little further. Because it didn't always do that. It's always been a bogus institution, but it didn't always not have priests married. My mother had been told to keep it a secret by the church, she told Saberi. Former U.S. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick defrocked over sex abuse. Oh, sorry, that's something else. Excuse me. That was just, I thought that was part of the article. That's just there. Okay. Thomas was 14 when she first met her father, a priest in England. Soon became apparent that he couldn't or wouldn't or wasn't allowed to be any sort of father to me in any meaningful sense, Thomas said, adding that the hardest part of her youth was feeling very isolated. I literally thought I was the only priest child in the world. No. If you got support groups for them, it's not. And one thing about it, brothers and sisters, the Lord never told you to do that. Let's go to, first of all, he told you to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. That was the first mandate he gave. Okay? He never established, Peter wasn't the first pope. He never established the Catholic Church as his nor the Pope as his representative. But I want to read something here that Paul tells what happened. And it goes right along with what we're reading right now. You got these priests. These priests are having children out of wedlock. So then they're having these children out of wedlock. And they can't do what we read here, but if any provide not for his own, especially for those of his own house, he have denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. You can't provide for your children, right? Because it had to be a secret. Then you got these other priests. Jesus had another story where, let me just read it. Let me talk about these folks. Why? Because they ain't got no business doing what they're doing. This is from MS. Now it says MSN. Didn't say, MSN.com. It said non-sex slave scandal, fresh blows to Catholic Church. Pope Francis's public admission that priests have used nuns as sex slaves and may still be doing so marks a new chapter in the abuse crisis rocking the Catholic Church. So they just abusing people. The pontiff on Tuesday said Catholic priests and bishops have been sexually abusing nuns, and that his predecessor Benedict the 16th had the courage, right, to dissolve a religious order of women because of sexual slavery on the part of priests and the founder. Just sordid. But he never. So now you got that, and then you got they having children out of wedlock, right? Because they ain't supposed to be taking a vow of celibacy. Obviously, they're not doing that because you got sex slaves, nuns, and then you got these thousands of kids that have been molested by these people, and you still Catholic? That's what I don't understand. How you didn't drop this religion? I don't get it. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 1, because Paul tells you that such a doctrine concerning celibacy would come forth. 1 Timothy 4 and 1. It says, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter time some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Now, what's the doctrine? It says speaking lies and he's called it a doctrine of devil. Let's read about it. It says speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. Let's listen. Let's see what they teaching. Verse 3: forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Now, what does he mean? Forbidding to marry. Well, let's go to the second one. It says abstaining from meats. Abstaining from meats is where you get the doctrine of Lent from, which comes from an older practice. Okay. Now, just so you know, this is from Sabian Researchers, page 111 and 112. He says a 40-day abstinence period was anciently observed in honor of the pagan gods Osiris, Adonis, and Tammuz. Right? So now, that's where that comes from. Pagans dealing in that, and they just incorporated it into the Roman, they co-opted it, incorporated it into Roman Catholicism. But the part where it says forbidding to marry is referring to their practice of not having not having wives. Now you got all this sexual debauchery going on, but you can't have a wife. And the Bible never told you that. Let's look at something just real quick, because this is what. Let's look at something real quick, if I can find it real quick. This is Leviticus, the 21st chapter. And we want to pick it up at verse because these are the true priests. This is the Levites. So it says in the verse 1, it said, the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say unto them, there shall none be defiled for the dead among his people. Right? So they couldn't be defiled except for their kin. Right? That was near unto them, like mother, father, son, and daughter, or brother. And defiled is when you going next to a dead body. You unclean when you come in contact with a dead body. Then he says something else. They shall not take a wife that is a whore. This is verse 7. They shall not take a wife that is a whore, meaning a prostitute or a harlot. Then it said, or profane. Neither shall they take a woman put away from her husband. Right? So you couldn't take a wife that was, but it said what kind of woman you had to take. So he said you can't take a whore, you can't take a woman that's profane, you can't take a woman that has been divorced or put away from her husband, for he is holy unto the Lord. Right? So now this is just an example, but it didn't say you couldn't have a wife, period. See, you can't. I'm gonna keep reading. It says talking about the high priest, it says he shall take a wife in her virginity, a widow or a divorced woman, a profane. Then it said, or a harlot, these shall he not take, but he shall take a virgin of his own people to wife. See, one thing it don't say though is a priest can't be married. Let's go to see, and here we want to read something in Paul because he gives some good examples or good advice Concerning marriage, he says in verse 1, now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. So now he's saying it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Why? Because if you don't have a woman, right? If you're not married, that means you can focus totally on the Lord. Like, for example, the Messiah, he didn't have a wife. Paul didn't have a wife. Okay? But let's hold our finger here. We're going to come back here. Let's go to Matthew, the 19th chapter. I believe it's Matthew. It might be Matthew, the 19th chapter. Matthew, 19th chapter. He's teaching on divorce here. And I'm not really concerned about the teaching of divorce here as I'm concerned with the question that comes up. He says, because he's telling them about marriage and shedding light on the situation as far as divorce. And after he gets done instructing, his disciples say something in verse 10. I'm in Matthew 19 and 10. It says, his disciples saying to him, if the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. But listen to what he says. But he said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs, which were so born from the mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs, which were made eunuchs of men. See, you had eunuchs that were made of men. You had eunuchs that were just eunuchs. They ain't deal with no woman, period. Okay? I give an example of this. I believe, just for example, I believe Tesla didn't have a wife, didn't have a woman, period. George Washington Carver didn't have a wife. Okay, this is just examples of men that we're familiar with, that not too far removed, that don't deal with women, period. But it says, so it said, for there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. Right? So you had eunuchs that were made. That was when they had these harems in various cultures. They had men that would be over the harem, but they wouldn't put no man that was viral. You know, in that they would have a eunuch in there. Okay, just hold your finger here just to show you an example of what I'm talking about. We're gonna go to the book of Daniel. I just want to read you something here. This is Daniel, the first chapter, and it says in the third year, in verse 1, in the third year, so this is Daniel 1 and 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. So now Jerusalem is besieged in 586 by the Babylonians. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, well, actually, this might be a little, this was 605 BC. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children of whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding, science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning in the tongue of the Chaldeans. And among them was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You read on further. But what he had a master of eunuchs. So like Christ says here, he says in verse 12 of Matthew 19, he says, for there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. Right? And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So now there are some, he said it's not good to marry, but he's basically telling you, yeah, there's some eunuchs out here. You got some that was born from their mother's womb that wasn't deal with no woman. You got some that were made eunuchs of men, but then you got some that's going to be eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Right? But he says, he that is able to receive it, let him receive it. See, the thing is, everybody can't receive it. This is, so back in 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter. 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter, we're going to pick it up back at verse 1. Give me one moment, please. So verse 1, it says, now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman, right? Because that's how Paul was. He said, nevertheless, to avoid fornication. I'm going to read that again. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication. Let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. See, that's y'all problem. That's the Catholic Church problem now. Besides all the false doctrine, you got one doctrine is your priest not supposed to be married, but then they touching these boys. They molesting these nuns, sexually assaulting these nuns. They having children out of wedlock. So they dealing with the person. They doing all kind of stuff. Why? Because brothers and sisters, we just like animals, just like beasts. If you ever understand the kind, when you look at human beings and when you look at beasts, it's something in us to reproduce. Okay? You ever seen for example, dogs go in heat. Dogs will go in heat. A female dog will go in heat at that time. And the male, you will have packs of dogs following her and fighting, shedding blood, killing other dogs to mate. Right? You got elephants who you've ever seen them in a rage right before they'll smash everything when it's time to mate. Right? We have something in us as well that propels us to mate. Okay? And it is embedded in us. The difference, though, is that we are rational beings. The difference is that we have the covenant of marriage, which is the institution to which to bring forth children, because ultimately, if you did not have that urge and those feelings and desires, you wouldn't have children. And therefore, you wouldn't have a species. So God knows always what he's doing when he does what he does, and he put that in us. So to suppress that can be problematic. He said, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Right? Then he goes on to talk about how, listen, the man can't say he ain't sleeping with his wife, and the woman can't say she ain't sleeping with her husband. He said, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto her husband. The wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. He says, defraud ye not one another, except it be for a time, be with consent for a time, and y'all agree to abstain. So it said, listen, to avoid fornication, you need a wife. And even in marriage, as long as y'all agree, you can abstain, but you can't deny, you should not deny your partner. He says that ye may give yourself. So if you gonna consent to defraud one another, or to refrain from intercourse, he says, defraud ye not one the other, except to be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer. So if you're going to focus on fasting and prayer for a time, yes, that's good. He says to come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinence or your lack of self-control. Why? Because if you defraud you defrauding somebody, end up that person go outside of the marriage to get that urge fulfilled. That's in us. Okay? So he says, now in verse 6, but I speak this by permission and not of commandment. See, this is not a commandment that you be celibate. He said, for I would that all men were even as I myself. And how was he? He was abstinent. He was a self-made unit for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Then it says, but every man had this proper gift. We just read in Matthew the 19th chapter, brothers and sisters, that everybody don't have this gift. He says in Matthew 19:11, but he said unto them, all men cannot receive the same, save to whom it is given, except to whom it is given. It's not given to everybody to be like that. It's not given to most people to be like that. So it says, So he says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. So it's good if you can, but then he says, but if they cannot contain, if they cannot exhibit that self-control, and that's how these people say it all the time, what they gonna do? They gonna abstain. That don't last long. Think about how many people you know that has said that. I'm gonna abstain. And they don't do it. Why? Because that's in you. That was embedded in you. That libido, that sexual desire is embedded in you. Why? So we can continue as a species, but it's supposed to be under the confines of marriage. Because ultimately, again, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be bringing forth children, all these kids, and all the stuff that come along with having kids. People wouldn't even do it. So it says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. But if they cannot contain, let them do what? Let them marry. Peace to you, Sister Ruth. It said, for it is better to marry than to burn. You see? And you see, it is better to marry when you look at the foolishness of the Catholic Church. And the sexual debauchery that we know about. I mean, you got kids coming all out the woodworks everywhere. They've been molested by these priests. It's a shame. It's a shame. But then, and then this is just some on a side note to those that are married. That was. You could even apply this to what I dealt with yesterday. It say in verse 29, but this I say, because he says something. In verse 27, he said, art thou bound unto a wife, seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife, seek not a wife. But thou, he said, but if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. Of course not. Because when we read, what I was reading about, it's good to be even as I, what he said I'm speaking that by permission. That's not commandment. Because the first commandment was given was to be fruitful and multiply. And he had the institution of marriage there. But he says, so, in verse 28, but if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. He said, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none. What are you talking about? He said, man, listen. It's good that you be focused on God. He said, the time is short. Then he said something else. But in verse 32, but I would have you without carefulness or care. He that is unmarried care for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married care for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. Right? So that's the one thing about a true unit for the kingdom of heaven's sake. You're not worried about no wife. You ain't got to worry about feeding your kids because you ain't got any. You ain't got to worry about taking your wife out doing all these things for your wife because you ain't got one. So you can straight up focus on the Lord. But that is not given for everybody to do. And you even see the examples of prophets that had wives. But here the Catholic Church, with their wicked self, gonna say, oh, you don't need a wife. And they molesting all these little babies and children. It's the last place here. This is Revelation, the 17th chapter. You still Catholic? Revelation, the 17th chapter, verse 1. It says, and there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials and talked with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. The brothers and sisters, the whore that he's talking about is not the whore that you shouldn't marry that I read about in Leviticus 21. No, this is a church. This is a harlot. Now it says she's sitting on many waters. Who are the waters? In verse 15, it says, and he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So now this church has influenced all these people, all the inhabitants of the earth, even those of Protestantism. Even those that came out of the Protestant Reformation ain't nothing but little Catholics. And and Catholicism is your mother. Verse 2. It says concerning this whore, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. We're not talking about the fornication of these physical fornication of these priests. We're talking about spiritual fornication. That's what we're talking about. It said, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of a fornication. Are we talking about literal wine? Now we're talking about that false doctrine. It says in verse 4, it says the woman was arrayed. Well, verse 3. It says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So now she's dealing in all this filth, all this abominations of the earth. Why does it say Babylon? Let's read something real quick. This is from Faith of Our Fathers by Cardinal James Gibbons on page 106, 1917 edition. It says, the penetration of the religion of Babylon became so general and well known that Rome was called the New Babylon. See, Babylon is significant because it is the hub of all false worship. It tells you that in Austin Henry Layard's Nineveh and Its Remains, volume 2, page 440. It says, we have the united testimony of sacred and profane history that idolatry originated in the area of Babylonia, the most ancient of religious systems. This is where Abraham came out of. He was called out of that hub of false worship, and the Lord told him to walk before me and be thou perfect. Right? But where is Babylon now, spiritually speaking? It's not the United States. It is Rome. How do we know that? We just read it was called the New Babylon, but the Bible, more importantly, tells us something. Verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. Now, we just read about these 7 heads. Verse 3, it said the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Rome, brothers and sisters, was built on 7 hills or 7 mountains. So now, when we're looking at this, it said Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And then we read, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. We should understand that we talking about Rome. Right? Because that was that last kingdom, the Roman Empire, and Daniel. And the church emerged out of that. That's your mother whore. That's where you get all your false doctrine from. I'm gonna read this. This is that's Babylon. When you wipe off the veneer of Christianity and of Christ and others and Christianity, you see it is pagan to the core. Pagan to the core. This is an essay on the development of Christian doctrine by Cardinal Newman, page 359. It said the use of temples and these dedicated to particular saints and ornamented on occasions with branches of trees, incense, lamps, and candles, vaulted offerings on recovery from illness, holy water, asylums, holidays, and seasons, use of calendars, processions, blessings on the fields, sacerdotal vestments, the tonsure, the ring and marriage, turning to the east, images at a later date, the ecclesiastical chant of the Kyrie Elysian are all of pagan origin and sanctified by their adoption into the church. Into the church. What church? This whore, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth, and you still Catholic? Don't make no sense. And with that, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you that we're at the Household of Faith meet every Sabbath at 5925 West 25th Avenue in Gary, Indiana at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We invite you to come out and worship with us where you hear the uncut, unadulterated word of God. We live stream right here on the Israel Teach YouTube channel, as well as at www.israelteach.org. Peace to you, Brother Isaiah. Peace to you, brother. And if you feel you want to leave a donation, you can do so on our website. And we thank all those that have done that. 100% of the proceeds go to the work of the ministry. We don't take it. What else do I want to say? I think that was it, brothers and sisters. Peace to everybody that's listening. Keep the faith. Keep the faith.